Good evening and welcome to this yet another event of CIC. We have done more than 160 events so far, and we're happy to welcome all of you to this special session. So today we have a very unique event. We have amidst us two very renowned and venerable Rinpoches. We have the Venerable Samdong Rinpoche and we have the Venerable Tenzing Priyadarshi Rinpoche. I have the pleasure of introducing them. The Venerable Rinpoche is a renowned scholar and philosopher. I'm talking of Venerable Samdong Rinpoche. He has worked tirelessly for the Tibetans in exile to preserve the Tibetan cultural heritage and to establish a non-violent society. He is one of the world's leading scholars of Tibetan Buddhism and is the author of several books. Under his able guidance, the Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies, Sarnath, has become a center for conservation of rare books and manuscripts in Tibetan and Sanskrit and for ongoing research in Buddhist studies. The primary influences on his life, in addition to his inherited tradition of the Buddhist Dharma, are the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and J. Krishnamurti. The Venerable Rinpoche is a fearless warrior of Satyagraha and Ahimsa, who believes that the source of fearlessness is an open heart, that compassion and loving kindness brings peace, both within ourselves and in the world. The Venerable Rinpoche is the founder and chairperson of the Maitrim Poshas Trust, whose vision is to nurture and spread the knowledge and practice of Ahimsa through self-inquiry, mindful reflection, and meditation. The Trust also carries out philanthropic and charitable services. We have great pleasure in welcoming among our midst the Venerable Samdong Rinpoche. We also have with us the Venerable Tenzing Priyadarshi. He is an innovative thinker, a philosopher, an educator, and a philanthropist. He is the founding director of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a center dedicated to inquiry, dialogue, and ethical education on the humane dimensions of life. The program is the center examines the moral purpose and meaning of relationships between individuals, organizations, and societies. The center at MIT has 6 Nobel Peace Laureates as its founding members, and its programs run in 8 countries and is expanding. He is also the director of the Ethics Initiative at the MIT Media Lab. Venerable Priyadarshi serves on the board of several academic, humanitarian, and religious organizations. He is a recipient of several recognitions and awards. His book, Running Towards a Mystery, is an inspiration for all. He is also an avid photographer and finds photography a tool for developing a calm, clear, and decisive mind, and in gaining appreciation for the profound, illusory displays of nature. We have great pleasure, and it's my honor to welcome both the Venerable Rinpoches to our gathering today. So please put your hand together for Venerable Samdong Rinpoche and Venerable Tenzing Priyadarshi. To moderate this event, we have requested Mr. Ravi. Mr. Ravi is well known to all of us, so he would be moderating this session. So I invite Mr. Ravi to take his place at this stage. So without further ado, let's begin this event, and it's over to Mr. Ravi to conduct the further proceedings.
Good evening and welcome to this dialogue on religion, conflict and peace with 2 renowned scholars in the Buddhist tradition. The subject of today's dialogue is broadly religion and peace, whether religion is a source of conflict or is it a recipe for peace. We would start with some initial remarks from the 2 panelists and then take the discussion into the specifics. One viewpoint is that religions demand sole allegiance, are ever on the lookout for expanding their fold, drive their followers into a passionate frenzy, and in a society and a world with multiple religions, conflict is inevitable. The opposite viewpoint is that religions promise peace, spread the virtues of compassion, charity, and fellow feeling. There is nothing in religion per se that leads to conflict, and what we see as religious conflicts arise from other factors, including the quest for domination and territory, the fight against oppression, and so on. I would request the two philosophers to address these two viewpoints or address the question of religion, conflict, and peace in any other framework. Samdong Rinpoche ji, could I ask you to start the dialogue?
Namaskar, all friends. The subject of dialogue at this moment is quite complex and in another sense little sensitive also. I do not find myself competent to deal with this. However, apparently a Buddhist monk, people might expect that such person might have a certain knowledge or experience in the sphere of religion. Religion as a recipe for peace or source of conflict. This was the question. And to deal with that question, we must be clear in the mind how to define the religion and also how to define the peace and conflict. We talk about religion quite often, but I doubt the users of this expression, religion, really understand what it does mean. What is the connotation of the word religion? Is a synonym with the Dharma, or there are some different? Academically speaking, the connotation of Dharma and religion are quite different in many ways. But usually in public use, we always use this as a synonym. The origin of expression religion is Western language, and Dharma is Indian Sanskrit language. But in common usage, this is using for as a synonym. So therefore, when we talk about religion, our mindset is referring to Dharma. That also sometimes causing a little bit misunderstanding. Now coming back to whatever the connotation of religion, you may decide the definition of religion, whatever you have in mind. The direct question is whether it is a source of peace or source of conflict. I can only tell my view that may not be acceptable to many people. But as a monk, I must state my own views honestly without any hesitation. Maybe acceptable to some of you, or maybe a source of examination, a subject of examination or inquiry about my viewpoint. At outset, I would say religion, as defined myself, can never be a source of conflict, or can never be a source of any division, can never be a source of comparison or competition. So this is my preliminary view. But how the religion deteriorated in this world due to human conditioning. I remember my late friend, a great scholar, Professor Ramon Panikkar. He used to tell us how the religious is gradually deteriorated from religiousness to religiosity and finally religionism. When we talk about religionism, then that is definitely a source of conflict and even source of wars and violences. But the religionism has nothing to do with the original religiousness, which are coming from the divine source and given to the qualified receivers, audience. So that is always a source of peace, salvation, and finally freedom, moksha, or salvation. So religionism should not be mistook as a religiousness. So that differentiation must be able to make in our mind. Religiousness is only concerned for the purification, evolution, and lead the infinite growth of the human consciousness, which can finally transform into an omniscience consciousness, all-pervasive consciousness. When it comes to the humanity, certain cultural or cultural expressions are grown around the religiousness, and which, for example, rituals and prayers and temples and communities and rules and regulations or moral conducts, some of them very authentic, many of them later editions. So these are aspect of human behavior or material things. Due to that, with human ego, the religiosity further creates a religionism that is a kind of sectarian viewpoint and far away from the core of religiousness, but in the name of the religion, which relates with the institutions or communities or individuals, and that ism makes the religion as a property of ego. Then this expression comes, my religion, our religion. Then further we say nation-wise or country-wise or sectarian-wise. So that is definitely we have used as cause of conflict and competition, comparison, and which at many times causes a lot of harm and making more conditioning for who considered to be the holders or the followers of certain religion in reality, although they are not. Similarly, from the Buddhist viewpoint, not religion in general, the Buddhist viewpoint, the 14th Dalai Lama have classified the subject of the Buddhist canon carries three different groups. The first is Buddhist Dharma. They talk about the path from ordinary stage to the Buddhahood. And that is only concerned for the Buddhist followers, the Buddhist people. And the second is the Buddhist philosophy. The Madhyamikas and the Bhikkambad and the Vivashikas and the Sutantikas and many other Nikayas within the Buddhist philosophy. And it also relates with other traditions of Indian philosophy. That is purely an academic subject, nothing to do with the Dharma. And it also can be studied or can be followed by anyone, no-believers or non-Buddhist people. And the third is Buddhist science, which deals with the ordinary worldview, which includes physics, metaphysics, science of mind, psychology, cosmology, and many other things, which is only deals with the secular subjects. That also the Buddhist canon has its own view. The Buddhist Dharma can never be, if someone really seriously adopts, it can never be a source of conflict or source of division. The philosophy and the science, which are dealing with the secular subjects, that might be cause conflict or competition. So we shall have to make distinction where is the real Dharma or real religion remains and where the human edition of the religious institutions or sectarian viewpoints. The sectarian viewpoints have nothing to do with real religiousness or the real religion, which is the source of salvation and reaching to the nirvana. The present society, particularly in the modern, postmodern society, the name of religion and the institutions of religion, they are only concerned with the religionism, not with the religiousness. Also not much related with the religiosity. There are many things are positive in the religiosity, but in the religionism, whether it is good or bad, we shall have to understand that is the nothing to do with the religion. That is not religion. if anything belongs to religion, then ism can never be. Ism is always come out of a center of I, or some doer, or some actor, and which feels that this is my property, this is my territory, and I have control over it, and I must have a control over it. Therefore, it should be protected from external forces, and for that matter, it must be compete, and it must be held up by all right or wrong means. So this kind of human behavior comes out of this religionism. So my summation for this dialogue would be, in a nutshell, religion or dharma can never be a source of conflict. And the conflict which are attributed to the name of religion are come out of religionism. So we shall have to differentiate religiousness, religiosity, and religionism. Similarly, the Buddhist dharma, Buddhist philosophy, and Buddhist science, this shall have to be clearly differentiated and defined well. I think that's all.
Venerable Priyadarshiji, can I ask you to follow up on the same questions of religionism and religiosity?
I think Rinpoche-ji has spoken so eloquently about it that all I can say is ditto. I think, especially with regard to conflict, I think we have gotten, in the civic society, we have gotten into the habit of labeling things as religious conflict rather than understanding the deeper causes of what creates conflict. And it has become quite common to take conflict over land, resources, ethnicity, and simply sort of give it the blanket labeling of religious violence or religion. But as Rinpoche suggested, that I think if we were to deeply analyze any of the religious traditions, you'll find that most of it is talking about some kind of shared value around love, around cooperation, around building of trust. And building of trust is one of the key things, because we are living in a world where we surpass 7 billion people, but we live in a trust deficit society. Civic society suffers deeply from lack of trust. And that lack of trust is giving rise to more divisions, more polarization, and therefore more conflict. In religion, the term itself, in Latin original, religiosa, which meant to bind, to bring people together, that it would be hard to replace religion with any other enterprise that could be actually helpful in building that sense of trust. Calling back to this notion of one humanity, but one humanity that is able to practice diverse sets of paths in terms of their spiritual or religious explorations. And the challenge where we run in is when people interpret certain religious worldviews with underlying agendas of other forms. And that's where I think we begin to see religion more as a cause of division. But I think if we deeply analyze as individuals, we'll recognize that it runs much deeper in our veins than what religious institutions even dress up as.
Thank you. Now, coming to religious traditions and practice. Our orthodoxy, literal readings of ancient texts that were written in different contexts and times, and fundamentalism within religion, a problem. A related issue is the notion of blasphemy, that people are offended when their deeply held faith is questioned in some way, triggering conflict. Could I ask you to address the problem of fundamentalism within religion?
I don't know. These days, the words of fundamentalism and orthodoxy are used with the religious sphere as well. In my view, the religions are always try to discover or reach to the ultimate truth. For reaching to the ultimate truth, they use the relative truth as a means for perceiving the non-duality and absolute truth. And in this process, I can't imagine some kind of orthodoxy or fundamentalism can be described. Actually, I personally do not know what exactly meant fundamentalism. The orthodoxy is used for certain sect or sectarian people who are quite having a kind of a rigid view, which are considered to be unflexible or uncompromising things. When we reach to the ultimate truth, there's no necessary or there's no need to be flexibility or compromising anything. The truth is truth. Whosoever have the perception, there cannot be a duality, there cannot be a different viewpoint, and therefore the idea of fundamentalism or orthodoxy has no room if someone is deeply in the religiousness. The religion is really grown in the consciousness of that person, then that person can be an authentic and a true person, and which may not be termed as a fundamentalist or orthodoxy. Expression of that person's perception of truth. The language might be differ, the expression might be differ. Language is a production of thought. Thought is limited, and the thought cannot be comprehended exhaustively, completely what is the ultimate truth. Therefore, the expression about ultimate truth differs from one tradition to another tradition, one person to another person, because all this we shall have to employ the limitation of the language, words, and that always comes out a thought, and which is only deals with the image, not the fact, not the reality. So by this limitation, then someone might be appear as orthodoxy or fundamentalists. But whatever it may be, if the person is really saturated by the religiousness, then the person can never be violent or making conflict with other, making competition with other. On the contrary, that person must have a pervasive compassion to all sentient beings without any discrimination. Otherwise, the person can never say is a religious person. What I am trying to submit before you is that whatever conflict is attributed to the religion, that is a false. That only does by the irreligious people. As person is matured by religion, the person's mind is saturated by religion, then that person, number one, cannot be violent. Number two, cannot be intolerant to any other. At many times, I used to say to my friends, the usage of language in these days are sometimes very funny. Religious intolerance, this is very often used. It's a contradictory word. A person is a religious person, then how that person can be intolerant? If there is intolerance, how it can be a religion? There's no religious intolerance. Intolerance is irreligious, always irreligious intolerance. And similarly, many other terms, I forgot, but there are many other this kind of terms which are not deals with the reality or with the facts. So therefore, these two terms, as you mentioned, the fundamentalism, if there is any fundamentalism which causes conflict and violence, then that is not religious fundamentalism, that is the irreligious fundamentalism. And the orthodoxy is also similar. Orthodoxy is mostly referred to the traditions, but actually traditions, what we mean by tradition, that is also, today they use, the word is used many differently. In accordance with the Kumar Swami, he very rightly described what is tradition. Tradition means originated from an authentic source or divine source, coming down through the lineage unbrokenly and verifiable logically and rationally. So these three things are there, then that makes a tradition. Otherwise, long perpetuated habits and systems, they can never be a tradition. To become a tradition, it must come from divine source or authentic source. And then there's unbroken lineage. And most importantly, verifiable through logic and reasoning. Something is unverifiable through logic and reasoning, that can never be truth or reality. So, if we refer to the tradition, then the traditions cannot be classified or say orthodoxy. Of course, there are many religious institutions or traditions, particularly Christianity, they are Russian Orthodoxy or certain group of people or certain countries, they use the orthodoxy. I think that orthodoxy only refers to a purity of the tradition, the lineage, nothing more than that. That might be different from the later editions of the different cults or sects. For that purpose, it might be called as orthodoxy. Again, what I am emphasizing is, it may be orthodox, it may be fundamentalist, if we this terms use, if that is referring to the religion, religiousness, then it can never be a cause of conflict. If it is a cause of conflict, then that is away from the real religion. The religiousness is no more there.
Priyadarshi ji, could I ask you to address the issue of blasphemy, the right not to be offended if somebody questions your faith or questions some interpretation of the doctrine?
There's a reason he's sitting in the center. You direct difficult questions to him. I think just to firstly briefly touch on this idea of literalism. Literalism and the tendencies of literalism is a disservice to religious learning. You see, most Indic traditions, they followed this pathway of iterative learning process that was also very much highlighted in Buddhism. That when you're looking at any religious philosophical system, the usage of agam, yukti, and pratyaksha. Agam meaning whatever we have heard, scriptures, written down, oral, or so on. Yukti meaning application of reasoning. And pratyaksha, to go beyond the reasoning and then validating it as a first-person experience. In the Buddhist tradition, we refer to it as a form of iterative wisdom, as in Shrutmai Pragya. That learning that we gained through listening, because it was oral tradition for the longest time, like other Indian traditions. Chintamai Pragya. That, again, that you apply reasoning to it. You try to analyze whatever it is that you have heard, that you have read, and so on. And then Bhavnamai Pragya, which is application of meditative processes in terms of having a direct experience of what you have learned. What literalism does in many of the traditions is it just sticks to agam, right? People get into this habit of just quoting the scriptures, just citing the scriptures. And it almost becomes like a vicious circular reasoning. Although there is no reasoning, it's just circular citation. I make an argument, I cite the scripture, and just by virtue of citing the scripture, it should be true. It's not open to any kind of deductive reasoning. It's not open to any kind of verification or validation in terms of religious experiences and so on. So it's very important to recognize that in the religious world, if we simply stick to literalism, which a lot of schools sometimes try to promote, it's actually a disservice in some ways to our process of spiritual explorations and religious explorations. The other thing that I would add, as Rinpoche-ji was talking about in terms of orthodoxy and so on, not all orthodoxy is conservative. Not all conservatives are fundamentalists. Not all fundamentalists are fanatics. The notion of fundamentalist, and in religious classes today, they have revised this language because in certain traditions, people take pride to go to fundamentals. So when you call them a fundamentalist, or they call themselves a fundamentalist, it simply implies that we are willing to go to fundamentals. When they become closed-minded about those fundamentals, then they become fanatics. So fanaticism simply implies that individuals are not open to the idea of conversation, to discussion, and so on. And much of fanaticism actually stems from a deep sense of insecurity You see. If you are truly deeply rooted in your faith, then to be able to open for any kind of discussion or dialogue or questioning should not threaten you. You see, these days religious communities, they are like, that animal, porcupines. They feel threatened, they stick out their needles. You see. And that's not how religious communities or religious institutions should behave. And one wonderful example that, among many wonderful examples, one wonderful example that we have amidst us is somebody like the 14th Dalai Lama. His ability to talk across different religious groups, to talk about non-religious groups, to talk across scientific groups that could be deeply materialistic or deeply physicalist, but to sincerely engage in a conversation, to truly understand what it is that they are thinking, how their worldview is shaped, and how it is that people can benefit from those kinds of intellectual exchanges. So that's the other thing, is that the moment we shut ourselves down to any kind of dialogue, any kind of conversation, just saying that this person believes in something else, so they're not worthy dialogue partners, that is already sort of depriving us of a mindset that is keen on some kind of religious learning. In order, I think, as Rinpoche has this, the way he's explaining this aspect of religion, that in order to be religious, you have to be willing to be fearless. That the path of following a religion is not fearlessness in terms of fanaticism. Fanaticism is based out of fear. It's deeply rooted in insecurity. But in order to be deeply religious, you have to be fearless in your inquiry and the process of inquiry. You have to be fearless in your renunciation. And renunciation, beginning from renunciation of attachment to certain worldviews or attachment to certain ideas. Like that one cannot truly profess to be religious while being deeply attached to certain sets of ideas that they're not willing to let go of, that they're not willing to renounce, if their learning, if their system sort of counters that or contradicts that. So I think, those are some of the key elements that we should understand about both pursuit of religious learning or spiritual exploration, however you want to define it, as an individual. And that is what we should be demanding of institutions, because institutions, religious institutions, should be facilitating. They're not there just merely to safeguard traditions. They're not merely to safeguard, thousands of years of learning, but they're also there to question the relevance. They're also there to sort of interrogate the idea that how is it serving humanity? And how is it making us better in certain ways? And those are, again, how we should be looking at religious institutions, that whether it is actually facilitating spiritual developments or religious developments, or is it simply making us porcupines, where we can't even tolerate the presence of the other, where we can't even tolerate the presence of the other because of their ethnicity, religious belief, and so on. So that's why this when we call ourselves religious, there has to be this deep kind of learning that needs to take place. And the question of blasphemy, I think, as I said that, earlier, that we are living in a society that is trust deficit. We want freedom of speech, but we don't want to be responsible about it. And in any civic society, we should not let go of civility, basic civic sense. And the basic civic sense is that you can disagree with somebody without necessarily intending to hurt their sentiments. Without necessarily intending to hurt their sentiments. You can have a civil conversation, a civil disagreement, even somebody who believes in polar opposite of what you believe in. And in fact, when you're having those kinds of civic discourses, there's more probability that you will find shared commonalities or shared values, rather than just becoming such that you are simply delivering intolerant speech about the other individual. So I think, there is this aspect of religious sensitivity, but religious sensitivity should be also something that should be mutually acceptable to each other. For example, we hear all these massive incidents, protests that happen when somebody draws or tries to draw an image of the prophet. We get sensitive about how Hindu gods or images of Christ or Mary are displayed in public at times. But nobody questions why there are Buddha images at airports and spas. Because the Buddhists, they're not making that much noise about it. Is that blasphemous? Meaning that it should be, when we are talking about civic sensibilities and sensitivity, that we should extend the courtesy to all religions, whether the institutions are quiet or whether the institutions are loud. And that basic extending of respect and courtesy is something that should be a given in a civic society, and we should train people and institutions to do that. Exactly.
Actually, should I add something? When faith is condemned or questioned, people get hurt. That means one's faith in a certain religious tradition or certain religion, and that faith is either questioned or challenged, then the person who having that faith is hurt. That means the person does not have a complete faith in his own spirituality. If he has a faith, he should feel a compassionate feeling to those persons who have challenged it. Challenge means trying to understand, begin to inquire, have found some idea about the other's faith, and therefore this comment 7. Then it will open, if possible, an opportunity of dialogue. The other is more intolerant and no opportunity to have a dialogue. Still, the person is doing something wrong. Therefore, the person can, the faithful religious person can have a genuine, compassionate mind and love to that person who have a kind of intolerance for others' faith. As I mentioned, that religious intolerance is a bad word. Similarly, religious tolerance is also a bad word. Religions are not to be tolerated. Religions are to be respected. All religions, the real word used by Gandhi, Sarvadhamma Sambhava, that is the real human behavior. We must have a equal respect to every religion and unshakable faith in one's own religion. If someone has unshakable faith in one's own religion, then whosoever challenges it, whosoever condemns it, there will not be anger, or there will not be a hate. On the contrary, it will cause a kind of loving-kindness, compassion to those people, because the other is ignorant of the faith. That's why he is challenging. That person also does not have his own faith. If that person has one's own faith, then that faith would prevent to challenge your faith. Because someone is deeply evolved into religion, it can never be unrespectful to other religion. Whosoever has a disrespect to other religion, that means the person is not matured in his or her own religious tradition. So that is very clear. To enter into any religion, that's not easy job. It needs a lot of preparation, a lot of practice and maturity. Only then it goes there. Then within this tradition is also the things are to be examined by oneself. Buddha never asked to his disciples to follow whatever he has said. Buddha have time and again asked the disciples, you don't be carried away what I have said. You don't accept my words because of you have respect and faith in me. I have said something, you must examine it by your own wisdom, by your own logic. In Sanskrit canon, there are many shlokas Buddha is talking about not to believe or not to accept without knowing. It is at many times dangerous believing something unknowingly. To know and to accept is entirely different. Today, what people usually tend to do is whosoever told by the teacher or written in a book, just accept it without knowing the thing. Buddha always asked his disciples, like a goldsmith examines the gold by cutting, by burning, by rubbing. Similarly, you should use all kind of logic and reason to examine my words. And when you understand what I am saying, then you accept it, if it is acceptable to you. Otherwise, you should not accept. So, blind faith, someone is going by just, as mentioned, Tenzin, just following the word of the Agam, the face value of the word of the Agam, then it may tend to become a blind faith. Blind faith will not lead you anywhere. Blind faith is the most dangerous conditioning of the mind, which is difficult to repair. So therefore, the Shraddha and the Pragyan should go equally prompt together in the religious tradition. Whenever there is a little bit lacking of Shraddha or little bit lacking of Pragya, then the Shraddha might become blind faith, and which is dangerous.
Now we move to the third phase or the final phase of our discussion, and that is resolving conflicts with a variety of religions both within a country and across the world, and with what Rinpoche ji would call rampant religionism. There are so many conflicts involving religion or in the name of religion. How would you address those and how would you try to resolve those conflicts?
In my view, there's no ready-made remedy to resolve the conflicts. And the first, we should educate the people. The conflicts which exist in the name of religion, we shall have to educate the people. It is not religious conflict. It is individual's conflict in the name of religion. Each individual involved in that conflict should re-examine their own religion and the other religions and try to create a respect to all religion. One religion is not sufficient for entirety of the human community. For the 7 billion, 8 billion people on this planet Earth, cannot be benefited by one religion, because the humanity are entirely individuals. Each individual has its own disposition, and therefore many religious traditions are coming into being in order to benefit majority of the people. One kind of taste or one kind of food is sufficient for everybody. That's, we can see it's not sufficient for everybody. Each one has different kind of liking and disliking, even for food and drinks. And that's only for the purpose of maintaining physical body. To sustain our consciousness and our mind, our inner things, there must be many different kind of religion, philosophy is absolutely required. It is our need. It's not our luxury, it is our real need. So therefore, we should respect all the religions equally. Sarvadhamma sambhava feeling should be created. That's the first thing. And the second thing, the conflicts which are attributed to the religion should be deeply examined, how it can be attributed to a cause as religion. The cause of that conflict is come out of religion. If some really involved or evolved within the religion and having insight of religion, that can very easily find this is just human anger, human jealousy, not come from any kind of religion. There shall have to be. Then to create a kind of equal respect to our religion, intimate dialogue between religions are necessary. His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama has recommended few things. The one is interreligious dialogue. The scholars should meet, the religious leaders should meet. They should have a genuine friendship with each other and also discuss the religious matters. And then interreligious prayers for the benefit of the entire sentient being. Then making pilgrimages with each other. So these are some possible methods which can adopt. The basic thing to resolve that conflict is about understanding. The cause of conflict is not lie in the religion. That must be brought to the knowledge of the common people.
Would you add anything to the Jasiji?
I would just suggest that anybody who wants to be a perpetrator in terms of religious fanaticism or take any kind of leadership role in that kind of movement, I generally recommend they should do at least 10 days of silent reflection. They should all do at least 10 days of silent reflection. You see, a very dear spiritual friend and mentor of mine, a Benedictine monk, he passed away a few years ago, Father Thomas Keating. He used to say, silence is the first language of God. Silence is the first language of God. Rest is all poor translation. And there is some key to that, which is that when you're talking about religious communities, you have to also include the contemplatives. And one of the wonderful things that I think the contemplative community can give in terms of the religious learning is the tools for stillness, the tools for reflection, the tools to analyze that shouldn't it be that the transformation of the individual is the primary focus? That the transformation of the individual is the primary focus, upon which one can talk about transforming the society and transforming other people's worldviews. And that contemplative approach, I think, oftentimes is muted or it's lacking in many of these interfaith dialogues. And that needs to become more and more present in some ways.
Before we open it out to questions, could I ask if you want to have, say, any concluding remarks, Rinpoche and Priyadarshiji, on the broad issue of religion and conflict and peace?
You know, many a times in last 100 years, people, and by people I mean academics, scholars, policymakers, and so on, have tried to prematurely declare the death of religion. Religion is here to stay. And religion is here to stay as long as humans are seeking a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, a sense of joy. Meaning that any of those inquiries can be facilitated by some form of religious or spiritual exploration. Now, when we understand that religions are here to stay, then we should spend some time, especially as policymakers, religious leaders, thinkers, practitioners, and so on. But it's a responsibility of every member of civic society to truly commit to the idea of how can we create more peaceful conditions for religious exchanges, for ideas to be exchanged freely among practitioners, among scholars, and so on. As I said earlier, that it's very easy for us to criticize an institution and say, let's get rid of it. That was the postmodern call that Rinpoche ji keeps referring to. Let's get rid of institutions. Civic institutions are very hard to build. They take hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, to build. But they're only as good as the trust that we have in them. So even religious institutions are only as good as the trust that we have in them. So I think in the current landscape of complexities that various societies are dealing with, it's important again to come back to this idea that we lack trust, and understanding religious knowledge as individuals, as civic society, might actually help us. We think it's counterthetical, but it might actually help us to build more trust in each other.
That's true. To resolve conflict is, if we look deeply, if there need to be a resolution which would be sustainable, then the promotion of the understanding is the only way. One thing must be understood by every person who claims to be belonging to any religious tradition, that religion can never be destroyed by external force. Religion is a quality of mind. One of the Tibetan scholars have said, when China attacked Tibet and destroyed the institutions, he have said that the Communist China is capable of destroying the temples, the monasteries, the houses, the statues, or the books, but they can never be destroy our religion. They can never be destroy the Dharma, which is taken seed and grown in our mind that can only destroy by ourselves. If we are sufficient enough to protect it, we are able to protect it by ourselves. Any force of outside can destroy it. So in the name of protection of Dharma, the conflicts are arising in the many community. So the community does not know the Dharma can never be destroyed by the external force. It is only to be destroyed by one's own negative emotions or development of mind. So that need to be educated. And the understanding of the diversity of religion, all of them are leading to a ultimate truth that can be understood if one has real faith in one's own religion. So every religious teachers or leadership should try to educate one's own followers to know one's own religion and develop a real, genuine faith in their own religion. And then today there's a lot of talk, even in the minority backward areas, there talk of conversion, change of religion. Religion is not like a shirt, you can change it any time. So, a real conversion means you study both of the religions and practice both of religions, and you find this is more suitable for my path. And without losing respect to the old religion, then taking the new religion, that is possible. That is the real sense of the religious freedom. We can choose any tradition of religion according to one's own suit. That does not mean the previous religion shall have to be condemned or shall have to be given up. So for one person's suitability and his growth of spirituality in his own path, that shall have to be understood. Without understanding any kind of religious inner meaning, just changing institutions or changing clothes or changing prayers does not mean the conversion. So therefore, what today people talk about conversion is a kind of deceiving people. The person does not have religious faith before, nor has acquired any religious faith freshly, but there is some ceremony and then something, then he has become Christian or he has become Muslim or something like that. But the person doesn't become any religious person. That shall have to be understood by the common people. These few things are understood by the common people, then there might be a different kind of attitude can be developed.
With Rinpoche's permission, 2 incidents. In Mongolia, some years ago, some Christian organizations, they were paying people to convert. They were paying equivalent of $2-3 to convert to Christianity. So somebody came up and said, it's very good. I have converted 5 times already.
Yes, I heard that, yes.
And then His Holiness often recounts the story when after 59, many Tibetans came to India, and so the missionaries were also quite active in some of these areas. So an elderly Tibetan lady, because of health benefits and education of kids and so on, she had converted to Christianity, and then during one of these group audience, she approached His Holiness and said, this life, because the Christians are offering all these conventional benefits, I have converted to Christianity, but next life I'll be a Buddhist again. So it does add, layers of confusion for people.
Now we have time for a few questions.
This is the time for questions.
He was paying attention. It's the first language of God. We have to work on it.
Right. So we have time for questions. I would request you to just raise your hand and the mic will come to you, and then you can raise your question. Mic, please, over there.
Sir, thank you. You said something towards the end that religions will not die and will last till man needs to find a purpose, meaning, and joy in life. I'm just wondering, almost all religions have explanations for purpose, meaning, and joy, but most of them are false purpose, giving false purposes, false meanings, and fake joy. And if you trust one religion, then everybody else is wrong. Everybody else, as in every other religion, is wrong. So in that case, how can someone who belongs to one religion respect, in as much as the what the other religion purports? Explains that is the way to live your life. So it's like a direct conflict, isn't it? And my second quick question is, why do all religions treat women like shit?
I think first thing you have to understand is that the quest of purpose, meaning, and joy. Religious traditions or spiritual paths are only offering certain kinds of methodologies. Buddha himself did not believe one size fits all. That's why, even in his teaching, there are so many inconsistencies. Because he was primarily focused on the individual, on the alleviation of suffering of certain subsets of individual. So it's important, again, to recognize that if, part of our challenge is that we want to complain about such things, but we readily give the agency to an institution or to a guru or somebody. You say, show me my purpose. Why? Work for it. And the spiritual traditions can show you the path. So they can show you certain methods, but you're going to arrive at its own state. So I won't go as far as saying falsity of purpose or falsity of joy, because we haven't experienced it yet. So it's sort of a blind sense of cynicism to suggest that they don't have purpose or they don't have joy. But we must experiment. We should try to find it. And you don't have to agree with the worldview of certain sorts. But just because you don't agree with the worldview doesn't mean that the methodologies are wrong, that the pedagogies is incorrect. So that's where I think the sincerity of exploration comes in. And I'm not suggesting that humans cannot explore purpose and joy without religion. All I'm suggesting is religion can help facilitate that process. And for your second question, I wouldn't say religion, I would say, why does human society treat women as inferior? It's again, it's going back to the same thing what Rinpoche was saying earlier, is that religious intolerance is an oxymoron. See? But we have gotten accustomed to using it. See? Patriarchy is not a function of religious systems. Patriarchy was put into religious institutions because it existed in society as well as a method of control and so on. Right? But if you practice religion, as Rinpoche was saying earlier, which is for the purpose of shutting down the ego, experiencing true freedom. When you're on that path to experience freedom, you give up the need for control, you give up the need for superiority, you give up the need for gender identity and so on. This question doesn't even arise because you treat every sentient being as equal. So I wouldn't again suggest that, it's religious institutions that encourage patriarchy. You look at social institutions and say they have simply used the dressing of religion to again justify that.
Namaskaram. My name is Vaidya Subramaniam. Just picking from
the message that religions synonymous with dharma can never be a source for conflict. And then applying that with a recent development, not at an ordinary level, but at the United Nations Assembly level itself, where there is an effort, or it appears to be, there is an effort to draw a fault line based on religions. Now, is that, uh, you know, gaining legitimacy because it is happening at the level of the UN? Now, how should institutions, religious institutions, and matured leaders of nations, respond to an effort happening at the UN itself that's trying to create fault lines based on religions? That's something contrary to the principle that you have just expounded.
I think the question is similar to the clash of civilizations thesis proposed by Huntington earlier. He's asking on fault lines of religion, whether there will be a clash across religions or fault lines.
I'm not aware of what she's talking about, the UN drawn line. I'm ignorant of that. कुछ पता है आपको?
Could you explain further on what you're talking about on the UN?
No, I mean,
The recent into the UN Security Council's discussions, there was, there is still, an effort to create some fault line, and especially in the specific context of hate speeches against certain religions. And there seems to be a divide between Abrahamic and non-Abrahamic. Is that good, actually?
the effort that I am aware of within the United Nations is where they are trying to actually bring in religious traditions, religious leaders, including indigenous communities, to try to look into certain policy making that they have practiced in the past. UN is an organization with good intention, but they have not always been very bright or efficacious. So they have been trying to sort of rectify some of those elements. And again, going back to this whole idea of religious violence and religious divide, UN was one of those agencies that would label things as religious violence. And we have had a number of discussions around this, that if you deem it a religious conflict in any area, in any region of the world, why is it that you don't have any religious representatives negotiating the conflict? Meaning, if it's a religious violence, then why do you have heads of companies, policymakers, military leaders trying to resolve the conflict? If it's truly religious in nature, get the religious heads to come together and talk about it.
United
Sir, hello.
United Nations as an organization, I don't know why the entire world is accepting. In my view, this is the highest and biggest institution of dictatorship. They are yet to become democratic. There are more than 300 member nations, something like that, but decisions are only taken by one nation or two nations. So still the larger population of the world accepting this organization. And I remember the case world, the nations can never be united. Sorry.
We have time for just one more.
Sir, myself Murli Krishnan from Chennai. Sir, in each and every country they have the constitution now, sir. The constitution incorporated, embedded with human values. Why we need religion actually?
Where do you think they derive the understanding of human values? You see, when you look into the actual notion, of origin of human values, even in the most secular society, or what claims to be the most secular society, there are religious overtones. Indian constitution is one of the better ones. is one of the better ones because people put a lot of thought to it. But that's one of the things that, again, we should not give in to the gimmick of certain things, like separation of church and state. Okay? When you can predict by voting patterns which religious constituency would vote for which party, there's no separation of church and state. Okay? So we should give away with those kinds of things. When we get to a stage where we can completely understand human values, not just the vocabulary or the definition, but the practice of human values, without the religious elements, then we can talk about a secular set of human values. I'm not saying that it's improbable. All I'm suggesting is that we are at a current stage where much of our understanding of human values stems from certain aspects of religious worldviews. No matter which country you live in, which society you live in, it will have certain religious overtones. There was a very prominent Jewish thinker and a philosopher during the Second World War, Martin Buber. He wrote a very beautiful book called I and Thou. And Martin Buber, he said, something very interesting. He said, we are not so rich to do without traditions. We are not so rich to do without traditions, but let every new ear hear it in a new way. We humans are storytellers. We form traditions based on those stories. There is no practice of human values bereft of those stories.
So are there any more questions? Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my pleasant duty now to thank our esteemed panelists. We've had an engaging discussion, a dialogue for the last 1 hour almost. And I think it's been a totally new experience for many of us. You were here last year, I'm told, and it's again very refreshing to hear you once again. And we do hope that we get more occasions to host you here at the CIC. So thank you very much, Venerable Rinpoches, and thank you very much, Mr. Ravi, for moderating the session so well. And just a few announcements. We have the next event on the 12th of May, and this would be a different topic, a completely different topic. It's on the Nobel Prize winning song and how it was shot. So we have a person coming over to talk to us on that. And after that we have, I'm sorry, it's not the Nobel Prize, it's the Oscar. Thanks for pointing that out. So we have the person who selected the background for Natu Natu, whom we're going to get. And after that, we have a discussion by an eminent civil servant, a former cabinet secretary, who would be addressing us on the 19th of May. So these are the two events for the month of May, and we hope all of you are there to attend those sessions too. Again, once again, thank you very much to all our panelists. It's been a wonderful experience, and we hope we get to hear you more and more. Thank you.